over there. Karen, there's one over there.
Start now.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order, the Sedona Fire Department Citizens Advisory Committee meeting of April 17th, 2017. And Tricia, have you taken the roll call?
I have.
Okay. Then let's move on to item number 2, Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item number 3, approval of the minutes of April 11th, 2017.
So moved.
Second?
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Item number 4, open dialogue / review of information previously presented and questions. Chief?
Just remind everyone to talk into the microphones if you guys could, please. I appreciate it. We had some comments that it helped greatly for those that have been successful at that, so thank you. We had a great presentation last week by the architect. Core Construction was here if we had any questions of them, and they provided a little bit of insight. And other than that, I'm here if there are any questions about anything you saw in the presentation or presentations in the past. Jeff Pichur is here from your tours of the station. If anything clicked from anything you saw, you had a question on that?
Did they have any handouts or something that I could have from last week?
Yes.
Okay.
We do have a handout. Yes. It was emailed to you, but if you want us to get the hard copy, we can get that before you leave.
Chief, I think the only thing missing from that email was conceptual Station 1 drawings. I didn't see that in there.
Yes, they just got those to me today, so we'll send those out as well.
All right, any other comments or questions of the committee members? Okay, let's move on to item number 5, presentation, rolling stock need and operational needs.
So board, committee, we're going to have Jeff Pichur give a presentation today on the fleet and equipment needs. Next week, we'll have Bob Moats, our telecom manager, do the presentation on telecom. And so this will be an opportunity to understand what we're talking about as it relates to our apparatus, which you may have saw when you visited the stations. And we'll let Jeff Pichur take it over.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
So our fleet program is predicated upon now and it had been started about 2 years ago, a capital projects program that Sandy began and then staff filled out, and then it's been updated. This is the 10-year plan. So as we have our rolling stock, in this case, it's kind of that middle section, apparatus and vehicles, right down in this section here. This is the heavy fleet down in that section there. What we did is take a smaller size agency with less than 5,000 responses per year and kind of ran it through a little model that the NFPA 1901, which is the National Fire Protection Association apparatus group, kind of looks at for years of service of vehicles. And volunteer departments, low activity, have maybe 15 to 20 years on a fleet, on a fire engine. Smaller agencies, 15 years. Busy agencies, 5 to 10 years, depending upon where they're rotated and how they're set. Sedona Fire District fits into the 15-year fire engine replacement model. And why 15 years? 15 years is predicated upon use, technology, maintenance, and how it fits into the new world dynamics of fire and emergency medical service and whatever other service that the fire department's evolving into. And if you've looked at the fire vehicles of 20, 30 years ago from the volunteers, it was generally commercial chassis rigs, Ford, Dodge, some Chevys, that folks just mounted fire bodies on, fire vendors did. They worked great, but in today's environment with emissions controls and everything else that's going against us, these fire engines are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The electronics are amazing. You've got to hook up a computer to these things today, like your car, new car today, to find out what's going on with them. In fact, the new rig we're getting, the guys are going back next week or a week and a half or so to Pierce to pick up. It's got a Wi-Fi connection that'll talk to the factory and maintenance shops automatically. It's just, it's amazing.
Chief, if there's an emissions change, is there passed down some legislation that we have to convert or upgrade within a certain amount of years, or are we allowed to run it out? What's the replacement for that?
So we run it out until it just falls apart. Really? So that's kind of the fire department waiver. We cannot waive any new purchase acquisition programs that from the emissions controls. They're set upon the vehicles by the government. And the fire service did try to get out of emissions, some agencies, a number of years ago, and the EPA and the Justice Department said no. And even the vendors that were building fire engines were saying it's a lot easier to build every rig the same with the same emissions controls. Even going overseas, they're putting emission controls on them because it's just easier to build out that way.
Thank you.
So here's the fleet. Fire engines are 15. Ambulances are no more than 7 years, maybe longer, depending upon wear and tear. So you can see the ambulance fleet there in the top section here. Here's our engine fleet. Our Type 3s, and I'll show you a picture here, are our heavy brush engines. And then the Type 6s are the smaller brush trucks. Then I have water tenders down a little bit lower there. The pricing on these, it may be low, but this was the number that I got from somebody that looked at what we had before and said, here's what it would cost you today to replace it. So, yes, sir.
Do you do some sort of a analysis of the vehicles? For instance, when an engine nears that 15-year period of time, do you do an analysis of the equipment? Maybe you can get another year or two out of it before you just automatically get rid of it?
Yeah, you'll see some of the age pieces on there. We've had 2 engines that were rebuilt in mid-cycle, and some of it was good, some of it not so good in the rebuilds, and we were under some pressure points for fiscal controls, and so we had some things that weren't done that should have been done. And so some of the fit and finish on rebuilds didn't turn out as well. But yes, we'll go through the rigs to find out when and if they're ready to go. And so the dates that you see here are just listed for planning purposes. If we find a vehicle that's going to last another year or two, we'll extend out and push the purchase date a little bit farther based upon its utilization. You'll find out the water tenders are coming up on 20 years here shortly in 2019. And that's when I think we have them starting to, well, actually we're going to cycle them out beginning in 21, 22. Mm-hmm. Water tenders, 15 to 18 years generally. And when I say generally, they're low mileage vehicles, low mileage use, but technology, weight distribution, engineering, the whole gamut on how you design a fire engine better, safer, or water hauler, better, safer. It all fits into the nuances. And you got to remember, our drivers today are not the mechanically inclined drivers we had of yesteryear. And so we have a lot of folks who are coming in off the street. All they've driven is an automatic their entire life. They don't know what a clutch pedal is. And so I think our tenders are all automatic. But as we look at vehicles that are more industrial use, it becomes a little bit harder for them to drive and understand the dynamics of weight, distribution, turning, radiuses, and those sorts of things. We train a lot with them, but the more modern the vehicle, the better driving it is and the safer it is. And you can figure that out with the cars you drive today.
Apparatus that is delegated for reserve after a useful life. After the reserve useful life, are they then sold off? And if so, is that factored into your plan?
Yes and yes. We don't have a reserve unit yet. When the new rig comes in, we'll have a reserve rig. And then, as you can see up here, we've got the new engine inbound here. Is that 531 or 511? 531. It'll arrive next month early. It'll go in service sometime in June, maybe July. And then the engine off of that comes out of Station 3, which is where this new one goes, we're debating as to where to put it. Station 6, or move engine 6 out into reserve in that scenario, or move that engine 3, old engine 3, out into reserve status. It's a solid platform. It's got a lot of power in it, so we got to figure it out. The challenges are engine 3 won't fit into Station 4. Engine 6 will fit into Station 4. It won't fit into Station 5. 5 is just an anomaly. It just won't fit in there. So we've got some things we got to figure out. And then we have another engine 561, which is, again, the bump down rig, the one we're moving out or keeping in place, is scheduled there. A unit will stay in reserve status, and then we'll send one for training, a training rig. We don't have one. So to be used for training and engineers and training and those sorts of things. And then when this engine comes in 2021, we'll start pushing rigs out for sale.
So we use an auction site that most all governments in Arizona use, and so they go out and it's an open platform for folks to bid on those, and the market bears whatever the market bears. Right. We just sold an ambulance last week that was, declared surplus. The other thing, I think I talked about this at a couple meetings ago, where, we have these benchmarks, and you want to follow the benchmarks as close as possible because they kind of all the puzzle pieces line up. Sometimes if you could, flip-flop and trade one or something like that, sometimes we get an engine that's just not as good as the other one. And so I call that the kind of lemon piece. So sometimes the ones you want to get out as quick as you can because they're causing us a lot of trouble and a lot of maintenance. And other ones work flawlessly, and you're like, man, there's some more life in it. And those may then garner more at the auction site. So like it's kind of a road we got to navigate through as you go along. And so we set these benchmarks out. We're trying to hold to them where it makes sense and where it doesn't. If we can slide things, we do. But getting a program in place is really important because we didn't have a program in place a few years ago. And we just kind of, we need something, and we got it or we didn't. Or in this case, we weren't getting anything for a while, and it kind of bunched a bunch of things up. And so that's where we're at.
Chief, do other agencies purchase the vehicles off auction?
Other places do.
Like rural departments or?
Rural departments. Sometimes these type of units end up down across the border. They end up all over the place, and yeah.
Chief? On the training rig you called, so that'll stay within SFD, or is that going to go over to the training center? Or would that stay here for, like you mentioned, engineering and stuff, so we don't have to take a engine out of service to run training ops? This engine will be just available for that purpose?
So I don't know. We're about 4 years out from even contemplating that. We've got space issues. Where are we going to put it, house it, and fit it? It makes sense that we keep it out here, and then let the firefighters, engineers drive it to and fro from the Cottonwood training site. But we just got to find a place to house it and put it. But we've got 4 years to figure that out, and we'll have a plan by then.
All right, thank you.
Chief, I'm getting the impression from this that we're, generally speaking at least, trying to uniform the engines so that this engine can move from this station to that station and you can switch them around. And there is that efficiency there. But living where I live, having the great big mega engines that are wonderful for Station 1 or Station 3 aren't going to get to a lot of my homeowners up in the canyon. And I'm wondering, I guess, are you going to take that into consideration over the next 20 years and still spec out some medium engines that will work up there?
Yeah, it's a good question. And yes, it's area specific. So we'll have the the specialty rigs that will float into those areas, like the canyon. We're even pondering what Engine 4 will look like, since it's second due up into the canyon. And it may not look like the ones we have here and at Station 3. And it makes sense that we have heavy rigs sandwiching the district in some different configurations internal because of the roadway network. Station 6 has a different dynamic as well in some of those roadways and getting up in there. So a one-engine style fit isn't necessarily a fit for us. The downside of that is when you have a rig go down, you got to figure out what you're going to float into that gap. So if engine 5 goes down, we have type 3s, those heavy brush engines that we can fit in. We've got one that's configured more so for structural firefighting, but that one's aging, and so we got to figure out its replacement to fill that bill. And if we don't rebuild Station 4, what are we going to do to fit a rig into that one? Engine 5 today fits in there. So it may be a duplicate of 5-esque. You know, what could that be? Engine 5 may be a new rig, and Engine 4 gets old Engine 5. So we've got some things to work out as to how we figure out the facility's final set.
Have any consideration for fast attack patrol style with small pumps, minimal hose for quick attack, backed up by next in engine company?
Yeah, that's our Type 6 engines. We've got 2 of those now, one at Station 4 and one at Station 3. That's these right here. And so they carry about 150 to 250 gallons of water. They've got Class A foam on them. They've got wildland hose deployments, so they're not a structural-based attack rig. But it's always followed up with an engine company around here and or a water tender coming in from another house.
So when you say wildland hose, and so those are backpacks for hose extensions so that engine can come in and pump to them?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. It's single-jacketed, lightweight stuff.
Right.
I think the key to that too is over time, I think the fire service delivery model is evolving as it has for the last how many ever decades, right? Or maybe since the beginning of time, it's been evolving. And so as we look at those models, the fast attack model, the little rescue units, things like that, it's kind of taking almost back to the Rampart days and emergency 51 type stuff. So it's the pendulum swings.
Yeah, but never to the center of reason, I don't think so.
Yeah, and so we're constantly looking for the best practice. So I think to get also to your question is we're looking for the best practice, and as the models evolve, and to your point, Dave, we'll absolutely obviously be designing rigs and a response model to the abilities or the confines of our response districts. We talked at one point, we had the ladder truck at station number 6. It was centrally located between 3 and could get into West Sedona pretty good. But most of their responses, not most, but there's a good chunk of the responses where the ladder truck can't get to because of the incline and the narrow streets and things like that. And it made it really difficult from a response deployment model. It made sense on a map, put a ladder truck there, that's perfect. But when we look at our stuff, it didn't work. So we took the ladder truck out of there, brought it back to 1. We gave it a shot. We just found that it wasn't working well. Or, response times weren't as responsive, trying to jump between the vehicles and things like that. So, but we're constantly looking at that type of stuff and being willing to try things out, which makes it difficult in our replacement schedule where you then start going, well, let's start moving. This is the busy engine. It's got a lot of miles. Let's take that one out, put it in a slower house and put it in, and get your miles to be kind of even. That model doesn't necessarily work because Station 5 engine. You can't swap it out with another one necessarily. You can put the 5 one somewhere else, but there's not a good. So it's the complexity I think that we spoke to, Gene. That there's just a lot of little nuances and complexities in our operation.
So the one vehicle that I did not include in the scope of bonding is this heavy rescue, and that's the one out at Station 3. It was a re-chassis on a grant from the state through the feds for medium and heavy rescue deployments throughout the state. It's a really low use vehicle. It's maybe a dozen times a year, maybe. It goes on more drills than it does go into incidents, but it's configured for confined space, hazmat, and water rescue. We've taken it out a few times on that.
Is there any funding from for things like that from formerly it was FEMA, but now Homeland with regard to USAR use?
So there are 4 teams that are designated for those funding pieces. The as you know, the UASI grants, which are the metropolitan urban security initiatives, have kind of dried out. And then FEMA really just has a tight budget now, and they're just trying to support the USARs they have out there today.
Okay.
So for programs like this, especially in a state that deployed a lot of money 10 years ago, 12, yeah, it's about 10, maybe 8, 9, 10, 2008, 9, and 10, moving rigs throughout the state and getting things set up, all that money for sustainability dried up when the downturn occurred.
I just wanted to talk about that truck briefly. It does have a couple more things, and I know you know it, but it also functions as a light and air type of vehicle. So there is some applicability to it. So if we have a fire and we need to refill up SCBAs and stuff, it comes out for that. If we need lighting for a fire scene or other type of scene, it also does that. And it carries some stuff for multi-casualty. So it's kind of our all-hazard vehicle, but the risk just isn't always there for all the things that are on it. But we certainly need light and air, and I'm sure they'll come up with that.
Is also for rehab as well?
Yeah, it doesn't have for rehab of air and for light, but not really for rehabbing folks. We call up an ambulance for that, but in your terms of rehab, yes, refilling SCBAs and stuff.
Looking at the costs involved for the replacement engines, and in response to some of the community, they're thinking that we can maybe get smaller engines, apparatus, and not spend as much money. But apparently, even smaller may even cost more because it has to be more efficient, more compact, and it's not the normal. So I would like you to dissuade that illusion that it's going to cost us less money to get a smaller engine, from what I understand.
So when we bought Engine 5, it was $550,000, I think. 505, 550. The fives are there, and that's a really compact, performing rig. It's not all-wheel drive, correct? It's not all-wheel drive, and Dave, in some places, when you got water flowing, all-wheel drive really helps out nicely. So again, budget considerations. It's got a structure pump on it. It's got the crew compartment. Crew compartment's smaller than the rigs we're buying today. It's a really high efficiency, well-contained vehicle. It was designed nicely. It's got a good foam system on it, which helps reduce your water usage up in the canyon, which is essential for operations in non-hydrated areas or when you lose power to the water grid, which when we have storms around here, we lose power to the water grid to pump water. So, yeah, smaller is not always cheaper. And when you go to commercial chassis, it's a longer chassis that doesn't fit into those bays very well for the configuration we need for not only our insurance services office ISO grading piece, but how we deploy and operate on fires these days. With the understanding that we're trying to come in from the canyon in some cases into the uptown or on the west side. So we're fighting building fires that are, structurally larger than a home fire sometimes in the canyon, because there's some big homes in the canyon. But we've got the same complexity across the district that we respond to. So it's just not one station staying in its district 100% of the time. It responds in and out of it on a regular basis to support operations. So we need those configurations in play. Again, smaller is not always cheaper. All right, so we're going to roll down into the light fleet. I'm sorry.
One last question on this truck, I promise. So you're saying that it confirmed that it's not in the original bonded request, and I see that it's 10 years from now. Do we still, I know, I don't want to go back in the day, but back in the day, each department throughout the valley kind of specialized in special operations. Is SFD now handling all of their own special operations? Like I think Camp Verde at one time was hazmat. We were technical rescue, and somebody else was Cottonwood had something, Swiftwater.
At one point. So we're Camp Verde still is a hazmat. We have hazmat techs and respond on hazmat calls, obviously, but Camp Verde is they're the hazmat expertise, and we're the technical rescue expertise folks. They have Swiftwater folks down there too, so we're beginning to do more integrated things on all hazard stuff that we are. But at the end of the day, we're more centric towards technical rescue, less towards hazmat, and they're probably hazmat Swiftwater down in Copper Canyon now, and then the other Verde Valleys and such they just help out wherever they can, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm just saying there's a possibility. I'm not sure what grants are going to be available 10 years from now, but also maybe getting together and kind of doing a co-op buy or something if we're still kind of doing that same.
I think you're right on, Lonnie, with the shared services concept that we're looking at, the things that are going on. It's only getting better and better, stronger and stronger in those relationships, and we're trying to find best ways to do it. And whether or not that is, hey, let's all invest in that rig and have one rig here. And it's located in in Copper Canyon or in Sedona or in Verde Valley, wherever it's at. And maybe that's a better way to go about that. And those are the things we're constantly doing to find the best practices. And I don't know what 3 years are going to look like, let alone 10 years. This here has been, this is like, we use a erasable ink because it changes. You realize, oh, this is what we think we need. And then we might, have a vehicle crash or something like that. We had a lady drive into the fire station one day and crash her rig. Drove through this. That wasn't on the plan. We don't have that on the plan, so we have to be flexible enough to go, this is how things go and how they might happen. So this is kind of a best guess today. And tomorrow, if I show you something different, because we did some more ciphering or figured something out, or one of those lemons becomes really sour, and we got to move it out quicker, or it doesn't get sour.
And something that we still do have in place is the smaller rescue, which does have the water and rope stuff on it, as well as a little bit of tower stuff. So that's kind of more of a quick attack type vehicle like Eugene's talking about. So we have a couple of vehicles. It's just how will that look in the future? So.
And I just made one last piece to your comment. There's multiple types of apparatus out there, and finding the right one. There's turning radius is really important, and Jeff alluded to that briefly, but turning radius is a really big deal here in this town. The horsepower and torque to get up the inclines that we have, really important. And so can you go to Fire Trucks R Us or something like that and pick one off the shelf and go, hey, this one's only this much money? You might be able to find some units that there's just differing prices, but you're not necessarily comparing an apple to an apple either. And so trust me, we would like to pay. I really want to own a fire truck company because I've been doing this 27 years now. Those prices have not ever once gone down, no matter what the economy's doing.
Right.
They've never gone down, and they have a very nice, healthy increase every year. So we're trying to just guess at what those prices are going to be, but cost of steel, changed dramatically in the last couple of years, which changes the prices. The type of box that you have, the configuration on the back, is it made of metal, aluminum, or is it made of steel? For weight issues and the things like that you're looking at. The durability, roll-up doors versus a wing door. There's just all kinds of different configurations. The foam tanks, compressed air. You can just go on and on and on. It's back to, I think, your comment, folks that are maybe at home wondering whether or not this is what I would pay for a fire truck. There's a lot of nuances that go into deciding this is what we really need, and maybe a little bit more has a better track record in the maintenance costs and things like that. So you got to really compare it all, and that's what we do. What's the good, not the best, but what's a good fire truck that's going to last the test of time and create the most in-service time and not be broke all the time.
Right.
And that's critical.
So the light fleet, which is line 46 down to, is that 84?
64.
64. Is not in the bond piece. It's cash and carry kind of approaches. These are the scheduled time for replacements that you have listed for these vehicles. They range from fire prevention rigs, maintenance rigs, wildland response rigs, pickups, utility bodies, command vehicles. This is the schedule. It may or may not be replaced based upon fiscal and or condition of vehicle, but we plugged it in just to put a placeholder in to, as Chief was saying, have the plan and we can erase it and move it if we need to.
But these would be funded out of operating every year? These would not be part of any ban? Okay.
Yes. This section is the equipment projects. A lot of this is communications and telecom up and through here. And what a lot of these will be cash items out of general operating expense. Down here we've got our air packs or SCBAs on a 3-year replacement cycle down here. $775,000, that's when they're due up. That is being considered as a possibility for bonding if the community chooses so. And then there is another item on there. EPCRs, yeah. It's the RMS EPCR piece, yeah. So there's a lot of stuff here that, this is the big item stuff. It doesn't include all of the little stuff, ropes, other under $10,000 items that we would spend on a regular basis to replace things in the fire department.
Go ahead.
Chief, the portable radios, are we splitting a single purchase over 5 years, or every 5 years they have to be replaced?
Well, portables have been lasting us about 8 to 10 years, but with the new technology piece coming in, we're running out of parts with the stuff that we have today. And Bob's been doing a great job on eBay, trying to find some parts to keep the stuff going. So it depends upon the technology and how the FCC continues to treat the frequency management piece. And Bob will talk more about frequency management, but we've split the spectrum once, and they're talking about splitting it again, which means a different radio or programming for it. The stuff we have today won't go down, so we have to replace it with the new technology. It's called the P25 criteria stuff. And you can program those sorts of things in it. But we use and abuse our equipment when we're out in the field, and portables are the ones that are hanging on the belts or in the chest strap compartments, that when we're out hiking or on fires or everything, they do get used and sometimes beat up. And so we've planned a 5-year replacement, and if it lasts longer, we'll push it out farther. But you need to plan for it. So this is the slide presentation. Here's the vehicles that we talked about. It's the Type 1. I've got a photo of that. A Type 2. It's kind of like what Mr. Waters was speaking to. Is it's a smaller than a Type 1. Engine 5 up in the canyon. It's a Type 1 engine, but because it's shorter wheelbase, some agencies could determine it as a Type 2 because it's a smaller rig. But it still carries the water, still has the hose, and still has the pump configuration for a Type 1 structure rig. The Type 3 is the wildland urban interface rig, and that's the heavier one. And the brush truck is what Gene was speaking to, as the quick attack stuff. And here's the water tender here. So these units up here are on a 15-year cycle that we want to look at to replace. And this one on a 15 to 18, depending upon usage.
Help me remember, please, for Mr. Waters up the canyon, between a Type 1 that's there now, shorter wheelbase, and a Type 2, does that affect the ISO rating?
So the answer, it depends what you put on it. So if it's a smaller, compact, less hose, less water, less pump, maybe. It goes into a calculation and it configures, they spin it around. A Type 1, it's 1,000 or 1250 or greater. It carries the same 500 or greater water. It carries the hose complement and all the equipment complement to make it the Type 1. ISO really likes looking at Type 1s that are fully configured because it fills the sheet for scoring on it. The Type 2s, it carries less.
So there is a possibility to get, as we see right now, a Type 1 engine stationed in the canyon that will meet the turning radius needs, the elevation needs, and so on.
Yeah, the engine up there does a really good job today. It's just not all-wheel drive, so if we were to have moments where it's got chains, the quick chains, right? So it has the quick chains on it. Sometimes it works when as long as you're not stopped and trying to get going with the quick chains. But all-wheel drive would be better. Sometimes with all-wheel drive, you lose turn radius as well. So you have to kind of throw that into the formula to see what's going to work best. In most cases, you try to hit that percentile of you want 80% effectiveness, 90% effectiveness, noting that at 10% of the time when you've got snow 3 to 6 inches deep up there and raging creek, you just may not be able to get across the river to get to it. It's just stuff happens. So you need to configure that. So a Type 1 engine is the large one. And here's our inventory today. Engine 511 is the brand new rig. Well, newer. It's 4 years old, and it's due for replacement in 2028 on the 15-year cycle. Engine 531, it'll have a 2017 stamp on it. That was the price tag for it, and it'll be replaced in 2032, planned. Engine 541 was built in 2001, rebuilt, I don't know how many years ago? 4 years ago. So it's had a refit, if you will. And like when the Navy goes through a refit, it kind of pushes the ship a little bit farther, a little bit longer, but it has an end life to it. So it's had a refit, and I would tell you it was a light to medium refit. It wasn't a full refit that you would go through the engine, the transmission, the drivetrain, strip everything down and put it back together again. That is our one of 2 older rigs there. Engine 551 up in the canyon, 2009, 7 years. It would go at 2022. Engine 561, which is at Station 6, the Chapel Station. 2020, it's scheduled. It's already 16 years right now, and we're pushing it a little bit farther out, so beyond the 15-year replacement cycle, mostly because of fiscal concerns. The other piece is you don't want to be replacing 4 or 5 engines in 1 year with a budget like ours. It helps to smooth it and push it out and kind of spread out those costs. And when we get into this replacement cycle, it becomes a lot easier to plan for it that way. We just have some catch up to do. Oops. And then the reserve rig that we're thinking is designated at the old engine 3 right now. It's a little bit younger, still got some good life. It may move to Station 6 and let 6 be the reserve so we can fit it into Station 4, those sorts of things, and give it a little bit flexibility if we don't build a new house there. So it's it's a plan replacement cycle. That's my little disclaimer on the bottom there. When we replace an engine, one will go into a reserve status, and that will be our this rig right here, one of these 2 rigs, 61 or the reserve will go to reserve status.
That reserve status is really critical. So for guys on the floor, I mean, we have things break. I mean, these are, technical machines that get pumped at, they're used hard, right? And currently we end up trying to grab a Type 3 to bring a Type 3 in to backfill somewhere because it has to do with the space issues, but it's a little bit of a fire drill, to say the least, trying to figure out when one goes out, it may have a domino effect and make, the consistency, the ability to move one here, go here, and put them all in the right places when they're done. It's a challenge, to say the least. And then when you get it fixed, then you got to undo all that. And there's a lot of inefficiency that occurs.
It can be valuable for relay pumping too. When you have the immediacy of need, and so on.
So having that reserve is really critical for our fleet.
Yes, and that's not just during breakdowns. It's anytime there's maintenance, because you got to do the maintenance.
Well, right, of course, just
and,
PMs.
And then training. I wanted to touch on that when you guys were talking about it. But when inevitably, when we go out and pull hose, you know what happens. We get a call, and there's hose on the ground, and we got to pick it up. We can have somebody backfill us for a little bit, but it's not a big area. We don't have a lot of different backfill. And when this place strips out of units, it happens fast. So if we had an extra a training vehicle that we could use and leave the hose and go around the calls without having to pick it up real fast, or as soon as calls start kicking out, because say I'm working in Uptown and we want to do some training, pull some hose, we're going to tell Station 1, hey, cover us if you can. But then 6 gets a call, then 1 gets a call, then 3 get, in a matter of minutes. So we have to pick everything up real quick, and we don't, every time you're going to train. So it'd be nice to have something in the back, for sure, in the backup.
Here's the Type 3. It's more of a front shot, but it's a shorter wheel-based rig, 500 gallons of water, about 500 to 750 pump on it, gallons per minute, smaller compartmentation, mostly aligned for a wildfire response. This unit here has some structure hose on it because that's what we're using for our rover unit today to kind of fill in for the other stations. So we have 2 of these today. They're both 18 years of age, and we're going to push the age a little bit farther and get them replaced 20 and 21 year or 24 years out. So that's the plan. We do have a vehicle in the grant requests this year, so if we get one, it changes this a bit, but we haven't heard from the Fire Act grant whether we got it or not.
We requested about $300,000 for a Type 3. So we're working to do our best to try to get these where we do have some revenue stream opportunities. The Assistance to Firefighter grant still has vehicle acquisition as a category. Whether or not we make those priorities, they have priorities for different type of engines, and then depending on your need and age of vehicles and things like that, all those things get factored in through a computer actually to even see if you make the first cut. So what we're trying hard, and Pat wrote that grant to help make that happen. So we are finding our opportunities.
Chief, is the Type 3 the engine that you guys typically send out when you're doing a wildland assignment?
A Type 6 or a Type 3. It's whatever the state or feds want.
And is it more desirable to the feds to have at least one of our Type 3s 4-wheel drive like we have now, or would you spec them out, the newer ones, just 2-wheel drive?
So I think we planned on doing the Forest Service spec, so it looks well, it doesn't look like, because ours will be red. So, yeah, but it'll act and just it'll work just like it.
Yeah, it'd be a 4-wheel drive as well. And we have 2, so they rotate. If one leaves, generally we're not sending 2 Type 3s out unless something's happening here, so generates a little revenue back to the district. But yeah, it should be 4-wheel drive, or that's what we looked at.
Here's the water tender, single rear axle, very agile, quick response units, designed quite well. They're just timing out. They're 1999s bought all the same time, and it's just time to move them along, to update them and do some things. So we've scattered the replacement schedule here. It'll push well beyond their 20-year life that we would want them to go, but money is money, and so we got to figure out how to do it appropriately. Again, in this case, we would keep just one, maybe as a reserve. They don't break down that often, but we'll try it out and see if it works. We are doing a lot of water tender shuttle drills. ISO loves that one, and it certainly helps in a lot of areas of our district that doesn't have the hydrant system or a really light hydrant system. It really helps out. So maybe having that 4th tender in the cycle would give us a hand on it for deployment.
Item of note, we had a 4th water tender at one point that we just sold maybe 2, maybe 3 years ago, just realizing our response matrix and ability to house units and things like that. So we opted to decrease to 3 units there. The water tender is one of our most dangerous units to drive most frequently. And you watch a line of duty death, the first thing I look for is it a water tender? And so the technology and things that have changed since 1999 to today, they've learned a lot. They've had a lot of fatalities in a water tender incident. So something that's just always on our chief's minds when we see them.
What is the determination? Is it center of gravity? Is it Poor braking?
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
okay.
yes.
Pulling out in front of you and don't realize there's all that weight behind it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's weight. It's going off the edge of the roadways and then trying to overcorrect, come back. CG takes over and wins.
Are they all baffled?
Yes. Yeah, they're really well constructed. They're nice units. They're really nice units.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice job.
Did a great
Yeah.
job. Those guys that spec those last units were amazing.
They were super.
amazing.
Yeah, super rigs.
I
Yeah, I mean, a lot of fire departments are just buy big, heavy 2,500 to 3,000 gallon tenders and lumber those things through the streets. These are really agile and they fit into really good places. So I think we would see a duplicate of that style rig coming back in. All right, so here's the replacement piece for the rolling stock. Engines, 2.9 million over a 10-year cycle. Water tenders, 690,000. And again, estimated cost, you don't know what a rig's going to cost when it comes in because stuff changes regularly, but these are the estimates of it today. These are the type 6 rigs, the brush units that we have in here. Whether they go bond or not, we don't know yet. We'll figure out what that really means when it's due. The 120 grand for a replacement unit is doable in general fund. In most cases, we can see what our future does for us on costing.
Chief, just maybe I'm a little jumping the gun a little bit here, but is it my understanding that if this went bond and we did all of this for this 10-year period, from then on the plan is to pay go, or to in 20 years replace those other ones? Pay go, or
if we could do it, would certainly help us create that capital reserve fund. And if we implement and fund that appropriately, we'll be funding it along the way and helping that down the road. So if we're trying to look beyond the 10-year, 15-year mark where the bond is, we'd be looking at that to hopefully implement the right practices so that we're in a better position and can afford to pay go opportunities. We don't know what interest rates will be. Maybe that you'd end up wanting to lease down there if the interest rates are still at 1% or something. But if they're at 11 and 12, then we it might be more expensive and definitely want to be paying and go. And so that's the idea. Is what we're talking about, funding the capital plan with some money every year. That's based upon what we expect the cost to be every year in the ballpark, because some are more and some are less every year.
So do you already have a plan on how much per year you're hoping your goal to put in your capital reserves?
Jeff and Finance were working on that a couple weeks ago, so I'm not sure we got that finalized yet.
So it's a chunk because there's a lot of catch up. So we're predicating upon a no bond premise. So with that in mind, the number's high, and I don't recall it right now, and maybe we can get Gabe to do a little presentation.
1, 2, or something.
There's a lot of money. It was right around, it's 800 to $1.2 million, depending upon how we move things around in the system. That's per year. It's like a depreciation fund. You just load it in there and you start replacing the stock as it's timed out. But that would be a tax base hit. If we did, if the community were, and you move this forward, bond this program out, it buys us time to reduce the annual inputs into it and spread out those costs over 15 to 20 years. So then we could start cycling it in. So that big